And I'm realizing now we're in speaker mode, so other folks' videos won't be shown actually,
I
because
was
I'm
gonna
not showing that on
say,
my screen.
yeah, okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Wonderful. Okay, so we are live on Facebook, and we've
Awesome.
got a couple of folks that have joined us, and I think we'll give it maybe a minute or two, see if we have a couple more
Yeah.
folks join us, get some folks logging in on Facebook. We're starting to get some folks in
Cool.
on the Facebook page.
It's Holly.
Yay. All right. Great. Good deal. We've got a couple folks that are trickling in on Facebook, and I will keep an eye on the waiting room on Zoom and admit any other folks that might be joining us. And
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let you take it away in just a moment.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Hello, everybody who is here with us. My name is Audrey. I'm going to be doing the lunch and learn today. And before we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and go over a couple of housekeeping things. If you could remain muted while you are here, that would be great. There will be a couple times that I ask if there are any questions. Ideally, if you want to just put questions in the chat, that would be great. And then at the end, we can have, like, if there's time for discussion, questions, things like that, we can definitely do that. So we are on Zoom as well as Facebook Live. So there is, for those of you on Facebook Live, there is about a 10-second delay. So that's just something to be aware of if you're asking questions, things like that. I think that's about it, unless I missed anything, Hillary, but I expect the talk to last about 30-35 minutes, depending on if there are questions kind of in the midst of it. And then after that, hopefully we can have some time for questions and or discussion. But I'm really, really happy to be here with you all today for those of you who are able to come. So I'll go ahead and jump in and just give a little bit of an introduction before getting into the topic of biodiversity and the Eno. So my name is Audrey Vaughn, as I said before. I am actually an AmeriCorps member, and I am serving at the Eno River Association as an environmental educator. So I have I've been here for about 6 months now, and have really been enjoying it a lot. But my background is mostly in wildlife conservation biology, actually. So I went to University of Georgia for undergrad, and then NC State to get my master's in wildlife conservation biology. But I've also taken a lot of classes and done work focusing kind of on more general human environment interactions and looking at the intersection of environmental science and social sciences. So we all know that, oh, and I meant to go to the next slide and I did not. There we go. That's me. We all know that that science and research is incredibly important, but it doesn't mean a whole lot if we can't communicate it with the general public and get people invested in protecting the natural world. And that's where a lot of my passion and my interest lies, is looking at the kind of nuances and intricacies of human relationships with different ecosystems and wildlife and our planet as a whole. And then also looking at how we can get people more invested and more involved. So obviously at the Eno River Association, we work very hard to protect our beloved Eno River and the Eno watershed. And I'll talk more about the Eno specifically a little bit later on in the talk. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Eno, but just in case we have someone who doesn't doesn't have the basic information about the Eno, I'll kind of provide that in a little bit. But rivers represent incredibly important keystone ecosystems, and they provide humans with all kinds of benefits that some people may not even be aware of. And we'll talk more about those benefits today and in the future. But in light of the importance of rivers and the fact that humans have massive, massive influences and impacts on rivers, kind of dig into some of the important topics surrounding environmental health and river health and how humans impact that health, and then how that in turn impacts humans. So that was kind of the idea behind the Lunch and Learn series. And I'll tell you after today's Lunch and Learn about kind of some of the future ones as well. So anyway, today for the first talk, I decided that we would focus on the concept of biodiversity, because when talking about biodiversity, you tend to touch on a lot of different topics and ideas, which is kind of a cool thing about biodiversity. And also many scientists argue that biodiversity loss ranks right alongside climate change when it comes to the biggest threats to our planet and to humans. So it's something that is very important, and something that I felt like would be a good kind of introductory topic to get some baseline information. So that is what we will be doing today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in to the talk. And for those of us who are just now joining us, my name's Audrey, and I will provide some time for like questions kind of probably about midway through, and then definitely at the end as well. So if you want to just pop those in the chat, that would be great. So biodiversity, what is it? And why does it matter? So we'll start there. So biodiversity can be defined as the variety of life in the world or in a particular habitat or ecosystem. And there are really three main components to when we're talking about biodiversity. We're talking about ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and then genetic diversity within individual organisms. So in theory, ecosystems are comprised of interconnected species that interact with one another in various ways. Each link between two species provides stability to that web and strengthens biodiversity, which then is further reinforced by genetic diversity within individual organisms. And that allows those individuals, and in turn, the species, to kind of handle and adapt to changes. So when one species disappears, a link is disconnected and parts of the web disintegrate. So basically, the more intertwining there is between these three factors, between ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity, the more complex and resilient that web of biodiversity becomes. So each of the species and individual organisms, they work together within a given ecosystem to maintain balance and support life. And ultimately, biodiversity supports everything in nature that we need to survive. So kind of getting into the importance of biodiversity, it's key for healthy ecosystems, for healthy humans, and for a healthy economy, right? So we'll kind of do a few like subtopics within each of those reasons behind the importance of biodiversity. So for healthy ecosystems, clean air and water. So biodiversity provides functioning ecosystems that supply humans with oxygen, clean air and water, as well as things like pollination of plants and pest control and wastewater treatment and regulation of floods, soil erosion, and disease outbreaks, right? And many other ecosystem services along the way. So native species are critical to the function of forests, wetlands, streams, aquifers, and without them, these systems would not be able to supply us with clean, healthy water, air, and land. Then we have climate change amelioration. So healthy ecosystems help to regulate our climate. The destruction of ecosystems really undermines nature's ability to regulate greenhouse gases and to protect against extreme weather, which in turn accelerates climate change and increases our vulnerability to it. And then finally, we have resilience to natural disasters, which I've mentioned in passing before, but When natural disasters occur, it is genetic diversity that allows some species to be resilient and therefore able to survive and adapt to those changing conditions. And when ecosystems are not functioning well, they are going to be less likely to be able to help protect against those natural disasters and withstand extreme weather events to then keep providing us with important ecosystem services post natural disaster. Okay, healthy humans. So food security is a huge thing when it comes to biodiversity. So biodiversity plays a really important role on world food production. It ensures the sustainable productivity of our soils, and it provides the genetic resources needed for crops and livestock and marine species that might be harvested for food. So biodiversity is critical in safeguarding global food security and making sure that we have healthy and nutritious diets. So every country, every place has different native produce that are adapted to local conditions, making them more resilient to pests and extreme weather. But less biodiversity means that plants and animals are going to be more vulnerable to pests and to diseases and things like that. And then when this is compounded by, our reliance on fewer and fewer species to feed ourselves, the increasing loss of biodiversity for food and agriculture really puts food security and nutrition at risk. I read about one report that examined biodiversity loss in 91 countries around the world, and they found that about 24% of wild food species were decreasing in abundance in those 91 countries. The status of about 61% were not reported or were unknown. So there's just not enough data to know for sure, but they know for a fact that at least 24% of wild food species in those 91 countries were decreasing in abundance. Okay, then we have medicine and pharmaceuticals. Humans have been using nature to source medicines since before written language existed. The first documented evidence was found on a 5,000-year-old slab of clay from India, which referred to about 250 different plant species. And then the Ebers Papyrus was a 3,500-year-old Egyptian scroll, which mentioned willow bark, which was then what aspirin was developed from later. But the unsustainable use of wild medicinal plants is definitely contributing to biodiversity loss and could limit opportunities for natural medicines in the future. I also want to note that we are losing species we're losing species before we're even aware that they exist, which means that we could be losing species and missing out on medicinal opportunities without even being aware of it, which is pretty crazy to think about. And then we have mental health. So not a whole lot is known about like the specific connection between biodiversity loss and physical or mental human health, but more studies are actually being done on that very specific connection. So one study showed that plant and bird species richness was positively correlated with mental health. We know that many associate the natural world with positive emotions like peace and contentment and happiness. And since biodiversity loss threatens our natural worlds, this could potentially negatively impact mental health. And then it's also important to note that biodiversity can have spiritual and cultural and religious value, which are obviously going to be important when it comes to mental health. All right, so we have got next a healthy economy. So resilience to disease outbreaks and natural disasters. I've kind of mentioned this before. This is really important. Obviously, disease outbreaks and natural disasters are expensive, but healthy functioning ecosystems are going to be more capable of protecting us and bouncing back from challenges. So for example, a healthy watershed with like wide riparian buffers and lots of biodiversity is going to help protect against floods, right? Then we also have tourism and recreation. Ecotourism is a huge industry. The global ecotourism market in 2019 was valued at about 182 billion US dollars and is expected to reach about 334 billion US dollars by the year 2027. People will pay really good money to see wildlife in the wild, but if biodiversity loss continues at the rate that it's currently at, that may not be possible. And then outdoor recreation in the US is an economic powerhouse. In 2020, this industry generated about 689 billion in consumer spending. So good chunk of money. And then jobs and livelihood is another important aspect of biodiversity. So in 2020, the outdoor recreation industry in the US also generated 4.3 million jobs. And the World Economic Forum stated that nature positive economic models in key sectors could provide almost 400 million jobs and over 10 trillion in annual business value by the year 2030. So altogether, agriculture and food, commercial forestry, and ecotourism industries could lose close to 330 if biodiversity loss continues at its current rate. So this was a statistic that I found. If we were to put a number on it, the value of goods and services provided and supported by biodiversity would be about 125 trillion annually, which is more than 2/3 of the global GDP. So really important for several different sectors and industries. Okay, so let's get into biodiversity loss. And then we'll have some time for questions kind of between two topics. But biodiversity loss, so despite the importance of biodiversity, which we've just kind of gone over, we are in the midst of what many would call the Holocene extinction, or the sixth extinction, which is ongoing right now, and it is a direct result of human activity. So the rate of species loss is estimated to be between 1,000 to 10,000 times higher than the natural background extinction rate. So when I say the natural background extinction rate, I'm referring to the fact that we know that extinctions are normal parts of the evolutionary process, but they should be nowhere near as high as they currently are. So the estimate that I mentioned before, it would mean that between 0.01 and 0.1% of all species would become extinct each year. And that doesn't sound like, you know, a huge percentage. However, many scientists estimate that there are around 8.7 million species coexisting with us on Earth. So that would mean that between 870 and 8,700 species were going extinct each year. So that's a really big number of species to be going extinct annually. Now, the global population of wild species has fallen by about 60% over the last 40 years. And about 1/3 of all species are threatened with extinction. And that's just to our knowledge, right? So super biodiverse ecosystems like coral reefs and rainforests are being severely degraded. And the vast majority of the extinctions associated with such previously biodiverse habitats are thought to be largely undocumented. So that means that either species have not even been discovered at the time that they go extinct, or the species has been discovered, but no one has yet found out that they are extinct now. So there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to species extinctions. I mean, because we're not just talking about charismatic, you know, megafauna. We're not just talking about those big animals and mammals that everybody loves. We're also talking about, you know, fungi and bacteria and plants and things like that we might not notice on a day-to-day basis, but that are still very important for a healthy planet, right? Okay, so drivers of biodiversity loss. Scientists have identified 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss that we're going to talk about today. So that includes land use changes and habitat loss. It includes pollution, over-exploitation of resources, invasive species, and climate change. Land use changes and habitat loss refers to the thinning, fragmenting, or destruction of an ecosystem's plant, soil, hydrologic, and or nutrient resources. Pollution is adding a substance of any form of energy. So you might be talking about light pollution, sound pollution, but it's adding that kind of pollution to the environment at a rate that's faster than it can be rendered harmless. And then you have over-exploitation of resources. That's the process of harvesting too many plants or animals, which depletes the stocks of some species while potentially driving other species to extinction. You have invasive species, so that's the introduction of non-native species that significantly modify or disrupt the ecosystem that it colonizes. And then you have climate change, which is the modification of Earth's climate associated with rising levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And all of these factors, all of these drivers of biodiversity loss are influenced by human population growth, increasing consumption, and reduced resource efficiency. And then lastly, before I take a break for any questions, I just want to note that the world's 7.9 billion people represent just 0.01% of all living things by weight. Yet we have had an enormous impact on other life and have caused the loss of about 83% of wild mammals, close to half of all plants. So it's just pretty incredible, you know, the impact that we have had on diversity in the world. Okay, so next we're going to get into rivers more specifically, but are there any questions? Are there any in the chat, Hillary, that you... I forgot to mention that Hillary Harrison, my supervisor here at Eno River Association, is also on the call, kind of in the background doing all the technical stuff. So Hillary, was there anything?
Not that I have seen yet. I am keeping an eye out on both Facebook and Zoom. We don't have any questions yet, but feel free to ask questions, folks, and we'll get to them.
Mikey raised their hand.
Wonderful.
Hey, cool. I had a question about the ecotourism part. So, yes, it can have like a great benefit with, you know, infusion of money into the economy, but I'm also wondering about how can we make sure that this infusion, this like increase in popularity of tourism, ecotourism, happens sustainably while, you know, maintaining biodiversity at the same time. Does that make sense, that question? I'm just thinking about...
Absolutely. Yeah, 100% that makes sense. And I don't have an answer for it. You know, I mean, I think that there are certainly, you know, just even anecdotally, certain instances where ecotourism is not done in the best way. But, you know, I think that's a really interesting point that, you know, and it's also kind of how we can keep that money within like local communities and things like that, I think is a big part of the issue. But I think that's a really good point. I don't have an answer for it, but it's something that I like, you know, would be interested to learn and read more about. I think it's a tricky question, right?
Definitely. Thank you for answering, and that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just posing the question and wondering and thinking a lot about, you know, the pandemic and the increase of, if we include in tourism, I'm guessing like just the utilization and, you know, of like national parks and state parks and people, maybe that's not necessarily included in tourism, I'm not really sure, but just people frequenting the outdoors much more than before, and, you know, compacting soil, causing erosion, you know, over harvesting, stuff like that.
I have a little bit of a thought there, if I can jump in.
Yeah, of course.
I think that a big piece of it is what we're doing right now is the education, and it's just making sure that you know, the point that you're getting across to folks that are going to be utilizing these areas and want to, you know, go out and go on, I don't know, safaris and things like that, is making sure that you are focusing on the conservation efforts and making sure that that's a big piece. I mean, that's what we like to see in zoos and what we like to see in various tourism places, is making sure that they're focusing on not only showing the species and the diversity that's out there, but making sure that that conservation piece is always there and that you're educating folks about conservation. So I think that's a big piece of it.
Right. Yeah, that was, as I was like mulling it over in my head, I was starting to think that I think a big part of it is can be, you know, policies and like you said, just education. You know, education is an important part of the puzzle. It's not everything, but it is important to, you know, provide people with the baseline information that they need, so that they know, okay, if I'm going and visiting a river, I actually don't want to be, you know, moving rocks around, because that can serve as a key habitat for a macroinvertebrate, and things like that. So yeah, I think it's, like I said, it's a tricky question to answer with such a big picture thing. But I think within local communities, trying to have like a multi-tiered approach that includes education is really, like Hillary said, is really important. So, but thank you for bringing that up, because that's just, having that discussion is just really important, and I'll continue mulling it over in my head all day. Okay, so did we have anything else, Hillary, or are we good to keep going? Yes. I can't hear you, Hillary. I don't know if you're trying to say anything, but I'm just going to go ahead and keep going.
I'm sorry. Can you
Oh,
hear me
no,
now?
you're
I'm
fine.
sorry. I have to
Yes.
unmute in 3 different ways while I'm
I know
streaming,
you
so.
do. That's why I was like giving you some time. Yeah.
Yes, we're good to go. Go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So let's talk about biodiversity and rivers more specifically. River systems are the zone of Earth's highest biodiversity, but freshwater habitats cover less than 1% of the Earth's surface, yet they support over 25% of all vertebrate species. Over 140,000 described species, including about 55% of all fishes, rely on those freshwater habitats for their survival. So freshwater species are really important to local ecosystems. They provide sources of food and income to humans, and they're key in things like flood and erosion control. But despite the importance of freshwater biodiversity, it is in a state of crisis, and freshwater species are more endangered than their terrestrial counterparts. So about a third of freshwater biodiversity faces extinction. In the last 4 decades, freshwater species have lost on average over 80% of their populations. So they're declining about twice as fast as land and marine species. And this is caused by decades of human exploitation of rivers, with dams and water diversions and pollution, habitat alterations, invasive species, all that good stuff. So I know that you guys, people who are here probably are familiar with the ENO, but I just want to feel the need to give like a brief overview of the ENO for anyone who may not be as familiar. So the ENO is about 33 miles long from its headwaters in Orange County to its confluence with Little and Flat Rivers in Durham, which then lead into Falls Lake. And the ENO watershed is in the upper Neuse River Basin. The watershed covers about 151 square miles. It spans portions of both Durham and Orange counties. There are several well-loved parks along the river, including the state park, ENO River State Park, West Point on the ENO City Park, Penny's Bend Nature Preserve, the Confluence Natural Area. So many great parks. A 2018 study that was done found that the ENO has overall good water quality. So it supports at least 61 species of fish, 12 species of freshwater mussels, some of which are threatened or endangered, 7 species of turtles, 14 species of snakes, 15 species of amphibians, and then a healthy variety of mammals. So that includes things like beavers and groundhogs and muskrats and weasels and minks and deer. And then also many bird species. We've got a lot of bird species going on, and over 100 species of trees are found throughout the ENO forests. Now the study also found that there are several indicators of non-point sources of pollution in the river. And then in addition, there are many anthropogenic factors that could negatively impact the biodiversity of the ENO. So for the remainder of this talk, we will kind of discuss each of the primary drivers of biodiversity loss that I mentioned before, and how they relate to biodiversity of the ENO. Okay, so first, over-exploitation of resources. Obviously, things like overfishing are going to be a really big problem in some freshwater areas. As far as I'm aware, it is not so much one of the bigger issues for the ENO. I will say that striped bass, which is in the left picture over here, has been subject to overfishing in the Neuse River. And we also have to think, when we're talking about over-exploitation of resources, we have to take into account not just things like harvesting animals, but like also excessive recreational use that could lead to things like more pollution or eroded riverbanks and things like that. Okay, land use changes and habitat alteration and loss. So let's talk a little bit about dams. Dams, as we know, can harm biological diversity by flooding the land. They can fragment habitat, they can isolate species. They can interrupt the exchange of nutrients between ecosystems and cut off important migration routes for species. So as a result of dams, 48% of rivers globally are moderately to severely impacted by either flow regulation, fragmentation, or both. And those impacts could double should all planned dams be constructed by the year 2030, which is pretty crazy. One example of a dam negatively impacting an important species in our area is the Falls Lake Dam in the Upper Neuse, which did isolate the Carolina mad tom, which is a small endemic catfish species. So it isolated those in the upper basin from the middle Neuse basin, and that led to isolated or patchy distributions of the Carolina mad tom, which then limited genetic exchange, which we kind of talked about earlier, and the importance of that genetic diversity. It is also important to note that legacy sediment associated with historical mill dams may also be in the river watershed. And then in addition to direct negative effects of dams, impacts from dams increase the vulnerability of entire ecosystems to other threats. So examples of that would be increasing the threats from climate change. So another important piece of the habitat alteration and loss puzzle is land development. The perfect example of this is what's currently going on with Black Meadow Ridge, which, as you may know, is a piece of land that is adjacent to West Point on the City Eno Park, and it is supposed to be developed in the near future into homes, into townhomes, I believe. So this kind of development encroaches upon what we call riparian buffers, which are the forested areas surrounding rivers, and they act as really important buffers between our waterways and human activity. So when forests are replaced with things like impervious surfaces, which I'll talk more about in a minute, we're going to see pretty significant biodiversity loss over time as a result of runoff, flooding, and so on. So this here is on the right is a picture of Black Meadow Ridge and the proposed development, which would be here. And it is in close proximity to Warren Creek and the Eno. Okay, so stormwater runoff. So this is kind of the pollution category, right? So we have stormwater runoff and sedimentation are obviously going to be really key parts of biodiversity loss within river systems. So impervious surfaces are, if you're not familiar, are just the surfaces that through which water can't be absorbed. So it's things like paved driveways, roads, parking lots, as well as roofs and things like that. So man-made surfaces through which water cannot penetrate. Now, with increasing amounts of impervious surfaces, we're going to experience increased rates of stormwater runoff, which means that when we have precipitation events, more water is going to be washed into the Eno, and that means that more pollutants and sediments are going to be washed into the river, and there's also going to be increased likelihood of flooding and erosion. So I want to take a second to talk more specifically about sedimentation, because with stormwater runoff, we're going to see a lot more of that. And sediment is just that loose sand or silt, other soil particles that settle at the bottom of a body of water, and there can be excess amounts of sediment when there's a lot of erosion and runoff. And increased sedimentation does things like it can block out light that plants need to grow, and animals need to be able to search for food, It can smother fish and amphibian larvae. It can destroy important habitats for small organisms. It can actually clog fish gills, which can obviously kill the fish. It can also lead to reduced disease resistance in those fish, lowered growth rates, altered egg and larva development. And then nutrients supported by sediment can actually activate blue-green algae that release toxins that can make humans and animals sick. And then I also just want to say that sedimentation can alter the flow of water and reduce water depth, which can make navigation and recreational use more difficult, and it can increase the costs of treating drinking water and can result in things like odor and taste problems with our drinking water. But all of these things from sedimentation can lead to decreases in biodiversity. So the EPA lists sediment as the most common pollutant in rivers and streams, while natural erosion produces nearly 30% of the total sediment in the US. Accelerated erosion from human use of land accounts for the remaining 70%, which is a pretty staggering statistic. And then sediment pollution causes about 16 billion US dollars in environmental damage annually. So let's talk about invasive species. So invasive species are those species that are introduced to an area and they compete with native species for resources like habitat and food. And they may sometimes outcompete them, leading to native population declines or even extinctions. And that is obviously going to end up leading to a loss of biodiversity. So an example in the Eno would be the Flathead Catfish, which has caused the Carolina Mad Tom, which I mentioned earlier, the endemic, the Carolina Mad Tom's population levels to decline within the Neuse River. The Flathead Catfish is an invasive top predator in the Neuse and Tar River basins. It has no real predators on itself, so it doesn't really have much keeping it in check. And it feeds mostly on other fish like the Carolina Mad Tom, while also competing with those fish for resources like habitat and food. That species is, the Flathead Catfish is native to the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio River basins, and it was introduced to the region in the 60s or 70s to establish recreational fisheries, so introduced obviously by humans, and they ended up expanding and becoming invasive. Another example, this photo is of Hydrilla, and this is actually at the Pleasant Green access point of the Eno. So a hydrilla is an aquatic plant that forms these really dense mats, and it chokes out other important native species. So hydrilla was introduced from Asia in the 1950s following its release from aquariums in the aquarium trade. It was released into waterways in Florida, and now it's like all over the US. But hydrilla alters stream habitat, it decreases flows, it contributes to sediment buildup in streams, and it can also cause decreased light levels in the water, which can be a problem for fish and amphibian species and other species as well. So hydrilla was actually first discovered within Eno River State Park in 2005, and it was largely eradicated between 2015 and 2019, which is pretty incredible because oftentimes hydrilla is like impossible to get rid of. It can grow in like any conditions, and it's hard to eradicate. So there was a multi-organization effort to get rid of it, which is great. Okay, and then lastly, we'll talk about climate change. So fluctuating temperatures can have really big effects on what kinds of species live in a given area, and that is especially true when it comes to freshwater ecosystems, since thermal and hydrological regimes are strongly linked to climate. So water temperature is one of the most important habitat factors, if not the most important habitat factor in aquatic ecosystems. It's very important. And many aquatic organisms like fish and macroinvertebrates, they're ectothermic or poikilothermic, meaning that they're directly dependent on the surrounding temperatures, so they can't regulate their own body heat, like their own body temperature, like we can, like mammals can. and they have really specific requirements for the water temperature that they need to survive and to thrive. So the Neuse River water dog that we have here on the left, these guys tend to thrive in colder water. They're a lot more active when the temperatures are cooler. So that's one species that could potentially be negatively affected by increasing water temperatures. Now, climate change can also lead to extreme weather events, which may negatively impact ecosystems in the area as well, and species in the area. So an example might be species like the spotted salamander, or really any of that genus. They might be negatively affected by that. That species, I mean, all amphibians need moisture, right? They need enough moisture because a lot of them breathe partially, like at least somewhat, through their skin. So they need to remain moist, and pretty much all of them lay their eggs in or next to water. But mole salamanders, like the spotted salamander, they also need these temporary fishless vernal pools, which fill up in the spring, so that they can lay their eggs, which can then safely hatch. So this species relies on these pools that fill up and then dry up, because obviously fish can't live in those. They can't live when there's not water. So they wait, they lie under a log, these salamanders, and wait for those pools to fill up, and then they lay their eggs there, and the water covers the eggs, and then they're able to hatch and become larvae before they grow into adulthood and come onto land. So when we have really unpredictable weather or climate, and extreme weather events, that's really going to impact those kinds of species. And extreme flooding events can also lead to ecological change and loss of biodiversity. So just many different weather events that might be caused by climate change can definitely negatively impact and species and organisms within those ecosystems. So that is the end. I kind of breezed, well, maybe not breezed through that, but all this is not meant to be, extremely doom and gloom, but really instead it's meant to provide some baseline information about some of the threats facing the and other important river systems throughout the world. Unfortunately, this is the reality that we're in. And I personally believe that the first step in changing the trajectory that we're on is to talk about it and to stay informed. And that was really my hope behind this series, was this Lunch and Learn series, was to just kind of talk about that baseline information about what kind of threats is the facing and other river systems facing. And then just to briefly say, in the future series, I hope to talk about some other issues, maybe more specifically climate change, things like that. And then to also have a talk about, positive ways that change has been made in the past, and things that we can do to help protect the river. So, and just kind of the power of people and community. So I really hope that everyone who's here can join me for those as well. But did we have any other questions or anybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a couple of questions. So I just want to mention a question that was already answered by Jessica in the chat on Zoom, but I think that it's a worthwhile thing to mention for our Facebook viewers. So Mikey asked, when you were talking about Black Meadow Ridge, what happened with the permitting process here, and has a decision been made for the proposed development? So I just wanted to read off what Jessica responded, because as our executive director, she had, I think, the best, she was the best person
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
give us a good answer. So she said, while the
Yes.
city has approved the site plan for Black Meadow Ridge, there is a pending water quality permit application, which we hope will be denied. That decision will come by April 15th. We also hope to win our appeal in May in front of the Board of Adjustment regarding our argument that the zoning for this site is inappropriate and inaccurate according to the prior city decisions. So stay tuned. So we hopefully maybe you're moving in a somewhat positive direction. But yeah, lots of folks have been doing a lot of work on that project.
For sure. We had a hike on last Saturday, and 140 people came out. It was really amazing to see the community, you know, responding so passionately to this, because it is very alarming and concerning, and definitely a very strong example of threats to the Eno, because it could be very, very problematic. So I mean, it will be very problematic if it goes through. So
Yeah, certainly. And I just wanted to mention also, I know that Ed had mentioned earlier for folks to identify themselves. So I'm Hillary with the, I'm the Director of Education and Outreach. I know on Zoom, folks are seeing that my name is Greg. I am just on the Zoom account, which is under Greg Bell, our festival director's name. So I'm also on my personal Zoom on another computer to make sure I am monitoring everything well. But Emily Friedman had to ask, can you talk a little bit about stilt grass, Japanese
yeah.
stilt
Oh,
grass that they
stilt
believe is
grass.
invasive?
Yes. Oh, it is invasive. It sure
Mhm.
is. Yes. Stilt grass is I can't remember how it was brought over, but it is originally Japanese, and it really thrives in these kind of riparian forest areas. So we have a lot of locations where it's just spread like crazy. Some areas not so much. But it's, I mean, it's a good thing to talk about. We talked kind of about hydrilla, which grows in the water. It's what we call macrophyte, so it literally grows in the water. But when we're talking about rivers and river ecosystems, we're also talking about the land around the river, and the watershed, right? So excuse me. So it's also very problematic when we have plants like that, because stiltgrass doesn't grow super tall. It grows in these like, oh, and Jessica has an answer too. Okay, so Jessica says infestations can impact the diversity of native species, reduce wildlife habitat, and disrupt important ecosystem functions. It is considered one of the most damaging invasive plant species in the US. Infestations spread rapidly, and the seed can remain viable in the soil for up to 5 years. That is a big problem with it, is that the seeds can remain viable for so long. But yeah, that is one of the problems with a lot of invasive species is they come into these areas, they're introduced into these areas where the conditions are great for them, right? A lot of them don't even necessarily have that many specific requirements for what they need. Like they're more tolerant, so they can grow in these environments, and then they don't have natural animals that use them as food, right? So they don't have anything that's keeping those populations in check, like maybe they would be in their natural environment. So yeah, stiltgrass can cause it. I mean, it can grow relatively high, and it's going to choke out other plants that are trying to. When I say choke out, I mean it's blocking light from other species that are trying to grow, right? From native species that the wildlife in our area is more likely to use. And then we have like a monoculture of stiltgrass instead of that biodiverse ecosystem with all kinds of different species that are growing. So anyway, I'm rambling about it now, but
this is Ed Harrison. I can expand a little bit on how it's been.
Go for it. Yes.
I lead the botanical garden walks at Penny's Bend on the Eno, and was around for their last prescribed burn. It was the first time they'd ever consciously targeted Microstegium stilt grass, which is really hard to control on the river, because if you do something to it, it just comes back in with the next flood. They ran a prescribed burn down into the stilt grass by the river and really destroyed it. It was quite something to see, quite a fire. It spread so badly. If people are of an age they can remember Hurricane Fran, it was not a major problem here, shown as occasional, I think, in plant surveys until Hurricane Fran. And all these people, as they raked up their debris, they raked up all this stilt grass and put it out to landfills. People picked up compost, et cetera, from landfills and spread the microstegium with all those viable seeds for years back to their yards. And that's how we got all over the triangle. Johnny Randall, the botanical garden, gave a presentation on it that detailed that. So it's a really horrible species, but apparently if you can do a burn safely, you can burn it pretty badly. They'll keep checking to see if it actually affected it. But it's big problem is that it's shade tolerant. It can photosynthesize in the shade. So somewhere like a shaded, beautiful, cool shaded riverside like the is just home place for it. So there is
Great.
some treatment, but it's not easy to do. You can't burn all that easily on the river and in the state park.
Yes. Thank you so much. That is super helpful. I'm no pro with stilt grass, but I do know that it is a giant. It's a beast.
Doesn't play fair.
No, it sure doesn't. And Greg just messaged me. Greg, I do know. Somebody asked to see a picture of stilt grass. Or maybe, I guess that's Hillary, not Craig, but somebody asked to see a picture of stilt grass, so that's why I pulled it up.
Okay, I just want to make sure you knew that.
I was like, oh, Greg's here, and then
it's me.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, this is what stilt grass looks like. So it's these kind of like, elongated leaves that grow in these kind of like mats on the forest floor usually.
And the stems lean on each other, which is why it's called stilt grass.
I didn't know that.
Wonderful.
Great. Okay.
We have a few more questions.
Okay.
I can probably answer this pretty quickly. So Linda asked, is the presentation available on the website or somewhere else? Will it remain on Facebook? Yes, the presentation will remain on Facebook, and I will look into ways to perhaps put it on our YouTube channel and or ERA website, but it will definitely be on Facebook in perpetuity as far as I know. Let's see. Oh yeah, so I think that Ed probably helped to answer this question from Mikey about can populations be controlled at all for stilt grass, fire disturbance and controlled burns, herbicide. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, controlled burns I think are great. I'm not personally super familiar with control mechanisms for stilt grass. I just want to make a note about herbicide being trickier near waterways. There are some herbicides that can safely be, like, for example, Hydrilla can be, there's an herbicide, I can't remember what the main chemical in it is, but there are some that can be used in waterways that safely, that do not harm, aquatic organisms and things like that. So that's just kind of a note to make, that like sometimes people hear herbicide and obviously there are really bad herbicides and you have to be very careful about how you use it. You have to use it as prescribed is the key. There are some that I know can be effective and used safely without like killing other species and things like that.
And it looks like Holly had a question that she posed to me, but she meant you.
Okay, I saw it. Yeah, so there's so much concern for climate change, and I would love to emphasize positive efforts made by communities to address issues. Audrey, how do you think can amplify its voice to help its membership to be more effective in climate communication and more? It is a big question, Holly. Hi, Holly. I feel like you probably have more ideas than I do. Climate change is something that is very. I really, I hope to do a talk on climate change soon, like I said, like more specific, and on climate change communication, because that is a big part of it. I think that there are a few pieces to the puzzle. It's like understanding basic climate change science, and debunking certain myths. And it's being able to communicate it effectively with different groups of people. It's tricky because it has become so politicized, as we all know. So it's a hard thing to talk about, but I think that like at a base level, talking about climate change more as the River Association, I plan in April around Earth Day to focus a lot on climate change, like on social media and things like that. And maybe just like talk about basic climate change science and then what can be done. But yeah, I mean, it's a big question, and I really hope that in my time at I have a chance to to engage with the Eno community a little bit more about climate change and specifically how it affects rivers, because rivers are going to be in freshwater ecosystems are going to be some of the, the areas that are most impacted by climate change. So once again, I'm just kind of rambling. I don't have an exact answer, but I mean, I think it's so very important that we talk about it, and then hopefully that we can come together and in community, make some changes. I think a big part of the puzzle is policy. So,
Yeah. Can I jump in, Audrey?
Yeah, of course, please do.
I think you have some really great points there. And I think that understanding climate change on a macro level is super important, and understanding just in general climate change. But to me, the big piece that we can do as an organization, and just in general that folks can do, is figure out ways that you or I or somebody can make a change or can help in their own daily life. And it, it's unfortunately it's not as simple as recycling, but that's a little small change that people can make. But like you were just saying with policy, it's learning the things that you can
Yeah.
do to be an advocate to make change with policies. So yeah, I think that that's like the big piece, which is
And
why
I think
education is so important.
Right. And I think too, it's like finding a way to personalize climate change. Now I think I might be veering out of the question, but I think it's really important it's really hard as humans when we know that something bad is going on, but it's not necessarily directly affecting us. We have other things going on in our lives. Not everybody has the privilege or the time to, think about this kind of stuff, but finding a way to make sure that people know, we are seeing the effects of climate change right now. I mean, right now, and this is something that is going to personally affect you, not to like scare people. You have to find that balance of like, not trying to like make people depressed, but just letting them know, look, this is something that scientists say can be stopped, can be mitigated, not stopped, but mitigated, but we've got to realize that this is affecting not just people in other places, but this is affecting us here at home, and it's going to continue to. So I think, using stories and personal anecdotes or whatever it may be, to try to communicate how it affects individual people like you, I think is one. Climate change communication is something that fascinates me. I took a class on it in NC State, and I hope to talk like more specifically about some tips and tricks about climate change communication in a future talk. Sorry. Thanks, Holly. Thanks for the question.
All right. Any last questions before we end the live video and then end the Zoom call today?
I have a question, but I don't want to take up people's time.
No, you're fine.
Well, I have one last question. It might be too big, but I'm really curious and have gotten excited about it recently. Are there any, and you can just cut me off or whatever and say we're done for the day. But are there any known grasslands or prairies within the Eno State Park or along the Eno River? Because I've been reading about, I've been so like fascinated by how there's such like centers of biodiversity, especially in the South, but we've overlooked them so dramatically and have allowed a lot of like forests to basically creep into them and forgetting the word, but push out native grasslands in those communities. So just wondering if there are any known ones.
I can respond to that if someone wants. Is that Harrison?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, if there's someone.
Penny's Bend is managed as a prairie. They're about 3 acres of true prairie in North Carolina. That's land where you really can't have trees and it's still soil. There are places with rock that don't have trees. Penny's Bend has managed to be a prairie. particularly nowadays through a lot of prescribed burning. And so prairie plants, either the same as are in the Midwest or Eastern cousins, can do really well there. And the Botanical Garden has been adding them by the hundreds in the last year or so with a grant. I'll be leading a walk there in early May for the Botanical Garden. And there may be others through the year, but I don't think the association leads a walk at Penny's Bend that's focused on the managed prairie area. It takes the whole river too. I stay largely in the prairie. If that helps.
Yeah,
But
thank you, Ed. Yeah, we have a
Yeah.
wildflower hike along Penny's Bend, but it's not specific to the
Yeah.
prairie. So
Well,
yes, you're absolutely right.
what you got at Penny's Bend is actually savanna. Piedmont savanna is what it's called.
Mhm.
That's great. And I will say that Durham Parks and Recreation at West Point on the Eno on the north side of the river has been working to restore a small Piedmont prairie type habitat. It's basically an early succession habitat that they've been working on the past couple of years. So that's one. And then, maybe in the future we'll be able to do something. We'll see. But yeah, so it's something that's certainly on our minds. Absolutely, because it is very important habitat to a variety of species and is a biodiversity hotspot. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for asking about that, Mikey. That's a great point. And
For sure.
Jessica is putting some great links into the chat on Zoom. I will actually also put those in the Facebook chat as well.
Great. All right. Well, it is a little past 1. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I really just this is just, I'm not like an extreme expert on this stuff, but it is all very close to my heart. And I just think it's so important to talk about it and have people who love the come together to talk about it and ask questions and think about possible solutions and all that good stuff. So, and I've already, like, you guys' questions have put ideas in my head and things that I'll be thinking about today and throughout the weekend. So thank you so much for joining us. And we will have, it's the last Friday of every month through May that we will be having these lunch and learns. And I believe next time, a Neuse River water dog specialist will be joining us, the guy who's been doing all this research on the Neuse River water dog, which is exciting. He's a friend of mine from grad school and he will be joining us. And then I will let you guys know the topics as they come. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.